Okay, so the question was about the general process for each of the panelists with beer and liquor and wine. How long does that process take?
Generally, your lagers will take 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what style of beer you're brewing. Your ales generally average take about a week and a half to 2 weeks, unless you're brewing something like a double or an imperial IPA, which of course has a lot more sugar content, so it has to break down a lot more sugar. That's about your pretty average. I mean, you can get into box, which you can ferment them for 2.5, 3 weeks, and then you age them for 6 months. But generally, start to finish, lagers 3 weeks to 4 weeks. Ales are generally 2.5 to 3 weeks. Are ready to package.
What about you, Andy? What about the spirits?
With the spirits, it's well, I'll kind of walk you through our whole process. It starts off. It's pretty similar to brewing. We take our grains and we mill them into a grist. We add it to water, hold it at certain temperatures to get the reactions to convert the starches into sugar, cool it down to where we can add the yeast, and then let it ferment. We use a distiller's yeast, which is a lot different from the brewing yeast. Ours is supposed to go really fast. It's supposed to work at high gravities, which means there's a lot of sugar, which means it makes a lot of alcohol. So the yeast we use is really designed to be at its optimum in those conditions. So our fermentation takes what Jesse was talking about with the 10 to 14 days and 2 to 3 weeks was mostly fermentation time. For us, it's 2 days. So I'll cook a batch on Monday. It'll ferment all day Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Thursday I can distill it. At that point, it's about 10% alcohol in 250 gallons. That's liquid and solids for us. We don't do a mash where we filter water through a grain bed to extract the sugars. We just put it all in one big cook, and so it's kind of like a big mixing bowl that we use. There's a big agitator propeller in there that's just kind of making sure it doesn't turn into a big dough ball, and we're heating and cooling, and then just pump the grain and the liquid and everything over into an open fermenter, which is another big difference. We have little 250-gallon fermenters, but they're all open on the top, and the reason that we can get away with that versus with beer is that when we go to distill, we're just taking the pure alcohol off, so we don't need to make sure that the beer that's left behind tastes like anything. Obviously, we don't want it to taste really bad, but it's okay if it gets sour. It's okay that there's there's bits of corn and wheat floating around in there. Another good thing with the distiller's yeast is because it works so fast, there's not really any time for bad things to get in there, start growing, and take over. So as long as we don't let it sit for another extra week for some reason, we're not really going to have any problems with really bad off flavors that would affect what the alcohol tastes like. So once it's done fermenting, like I said, it's about 10%. We pump that into the still, solids and everything again, and we start heating it. And the reason that distillation works is that the alcohol has a lower boiling point, and so I think it's 172 degrees, and then water's 212, so we have a mixture of alcohol and water, and ours usually comes to a boil around 198 degrees. And when that happens, the alcohol vapors start coming off, passing through our still, becoming more purified, and then going through the condenser and coming out into our receiving tank. At the beginning of the process, we're getting a lot of alcohols that don't taste very good. The stuff before the pure ethanol comes off. So we put that into what's called the heads tank, and then by tasting it, we figure out when it starts to taste good, and then we start collecting in our hearts tank, and that's where most of the run goes, into the hearts tank. And so we collect all that. We'll do a couple mashes through the still, collect all of that together, put all of the pure alcohol back into the still and redistill that any number of times depending on what we're making. We do a vapor infusion for the gin. That's like Bombay Sapphire does vapor infusion. So what that means is we have a little basket off to the side. We can force the alcohol vapors to go through that instead of through the regular part of the still. And we have that packed full of all of our botanicals and herbs and stuff that we want to infuse the flavors of, juniper being the main one. And then, but for the bourbon, once we're done distilling, that gets put into charred oak barrels and aged for 6 to 8 months. We don't have to do it for a year or 2 years or anything because we're using a smaller barrel, which has less surface area to volume ratio. So there's a higher percentage of the spirit is in contact with the wood, which is what makes it mature. So I guess trying to get back to the original question for vodka and gin. We're usually bottling a batch in 2 weeks just because of all of the, we have to do usually four first distillations, and then we do 2 to 3, sometimes 4 redistillations of it, and then filter and get it ready for bottling. So we can be bottling that in about 2 weeks. But with the bourbon, it's 2 weeks to get it into barrels, and then about 6 months of aging. So.
Jonathan?
Okay, so I think kind of what we've heard in both cases is there's a big difference between the aging and the fermentation. Wine is exactly the same way. I mean, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and it kind of depends on the grape variety and how much sugar there is. It depends on what the ultimate goal of the production of the wine is. Are you making a sparkling wine? Well, that takes a little longer because it does a secondary fermentation. Are you making a port, which is a fortified wine that you arrest the process of fermentation with the addition of a grape spirit or a spirit of some sort, so that pumps up the alcohol and makes a sweet wine, or in the production of a still dry wine, which depending on whether it's a red or a white, or how thick or thin the skin is, how big the seeds are, all these sorts of variables that pop in. So there's no exact answer, but it's a whole series of very complex things that, in this example, the winemaker has to take into account after having had lengthy discussions with the grape grower. So.